In this series, we've been going over all of the cards in the modern ban list and explaining why they're there. This will be the last video in this series going over the modern ban list, as there's only 5 cards left that we haven't covered yet. We'll start by mentioning 2 cards that were played in the same deck, Bridge from Below and Hogaak, Arisen, Necropolis. Bridge from Below is an enchantment with the mana cost of 3 black with the abilities where, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, if Bridge is in your graveyard, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you exile Bridge from your graveyard. This card was banned in July of 2019. Hogaak is an 8/8 legendary avatar with a mana cost of 5 and 2 black-green hybrid mana. It has abilities where you can't spend mana to cast Hogaak. It has Convoke, meaning you can tap your creatures to cast the spell, each creature you tap paying for 1 of the 1 mana of the creature's color. Delve, meaning you can exile cards from your graveyard to cast a spell, each card you exile paying for 1. It has Trample, meaning excess combat damage is dealt to the defending player. And finally, you can cast Hogaak from your graveyard. Hogaak was banned in August of 2019. Now, why were these cards banned? Before the release of Hogaak, Bridge was seen playing a deck called Bridgevine. This deck was named after Bridge from Below and Vengevine. Vengevine was a 4/3 with haste, meaning it can attack the same turn enters the battlefield, and the ability where, whenever you cast your second creature spell on a turn, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. This deck basically just wanted to mill as many bridges and vines as it could using creatures like Stitcher's Supplier, a 1/1 for 1 that mills you for 3 whenever it enters the battlefield or dies, or cards like Faithless Looting, which was unbanned at the time and was actually banned at the same time as Hogaak. It would cast a whole bunch of creatures like Gravecrawler, which could be cast from your graveyard as long as you control a zombie, to bring back Vengevines. Then it would sacrifice its own creatures to cheap sack outlets to make zombies off a bridge. The deck was very good at putting the card it wanted into the graveyard very quickly and making a huge board full of zombies. The thing about Bridge is that it's stacked with multiple copies. So if you had 2 bridges in your graveyard, 1 Gravecrawler and a way to kill it, you could sacrifice your crawler twice, making 2 zombies each time, putting out a total of 4 2/2s. The deck wasn't just good at putting out tons of damage, however, it was also really consistent. Most of the deck's cards just needed to be milled to be turned on, and since milling is priced a lot cheaper than drawing cards, it got to these combos together a lot more often than other decks. This deck was very strong, but not necessarily broken. The straw that broke the camel's back was Modern Horizons. This set introduced 2 very powerful cards to Modern, Hogaak and Altar of Dementia. We've already talked about Hogaak, but Altar was similarly important. This is an artifact with a mana cost of 2 and the ability where you can sacrifice a creature to make target player mill cards equal to its power. These cards were individually very good in the deck. Hogaak was very easy to cast as the deck was great at milling itself, giving them cards to exile for the delve cost. And the decks played lots of creatures and made lots of tokens off of Bridge, giving it tons of creatures to tap to pay the colored mana cost. And of course, Hogaak, like all the best cards in the deck, just needed to be milled to be turned on, letting you get access to it very easily. Altar was the new de facto best sacrifice outlet for the deck. While the other sack outlets were only 1 mana, the extra power and consistency for milling cards off of Altar was just too much. However, while these cards were individually very powerful, the real problem was how they interacted together. The problem was that it was very easy to simply loop Hogaak over and over with Altar and Bridge. What you would do is you would cast Hogaak and then sack it with Altar, and then target yourself with the ability. If there were at least 2 bridges in your graveyard, you could make 2 zombies and then mill 8 cards. This would give you the 5 cards needed to delve to cast Hogaak and 2 creatures you would need to convoke it. So you could cast it again and again, making more and more zombies each time. This meant that the deck no longer had to go to combat to win anymore. After milling your whole deck by looping Hogaak, you would often have enough power in play to mill at least 60 cards from your opponent's deck, winning the game right away. However, this often wasn't possible, as if you got unlucky and didn't mill your bridges soon enough, you wouldn't make enough zombies. This didn't really matter though, as you would just do the loop a couple of times instead and end on a board full of zombies, a massive Hogaak, and more than enough power to kill your opponent the next turn. This would basically force them to have a board wipe to not die, and even if they did, you could just make a massive board again the next turn, and the turn after that, and the turn after that, and so on and so on. This deck wasn't just too good, it wasn't just broken, it was maybe one of the most powerful, most ever centralized deck the format has ever seen, easily on par with Eldrazi Winter, if not worse. Hogaak was by far the best deck in the format, and it was winning basically everything. Pretty soon, half of most top 8s were Hogaak decks, if not more. Wizards responded by banning Bridge from Below in July to weaken the deck and stop these loops. However, this proved to not be enough, as graveyard-based Hogaak decks were still winning far too much. So just a month later, Wizards banned Hogaak as well to finally stop his reign of terror, and hit Faithless Looting while they were at it to finally stop graveyard decks from being the best deck of the format. Could Bridge from Below or Hogaak be unbanned? We have to cover each of these separately. First off, Bridge from Below. This is going to be a soft no. Bridge is still really strong, and while Bridgevine was okay in the format, it was still a very strong deck, and Alter made the deck a lot better. Not to mention, Bridge will only get stronger with time. It's very likely that there will be more decks that are able to abuse it and break it in the future, even without Hogaak, so keeping it banned is the better choice. Next up, Hogaak. This is a hard no. Hogaak was too good even without Bridge, and even though it won't have looted anymore, graveyard decks have shown to be strong anyway. One of the better decks in Modern right now is Living End, showing that graveyard-focused strategies can still be very strong, even with the better graveyard interaction cards that have been printed since Hogaak's banning, such as Endurance. How could these cards be fixed to be unbanned? Starting with Bridge, the best I can think of is giving it a once per turn clause. Letting you make multiple zombies a turn with it is simply too good for a card that requires no resource investment at all. That might still not be enough, but it would be close. On Hogaak's end, I would probably remove the ability to cast it from your graveyard. This card is simply too strong for a card that doesn't have to be drawn to be used, especially considering its cost can be paid by milling cards. If you had to actually draw it, that would make it a very strong card, but not a free 8/8 beater like it was in the decks that played it, and would stop you from looping like Bridgevine decks used to do. Next up, we have Yorion the Sky Nomad. This is a 4/5 legendary bird serpent with a mana cost of 3 and 2 hybrid white-blue mana. It has Companion. Your starting deck has 20 more cards in the minimum deck size. This means that at the start of the game, if you meet its Companion requirement, you can reveal it from your sideboard, and then you can pay 3 to put it in your hand from your sideboard later on in the game. It has Flying, meaning it can't be blocked except by creatures with Flying or Reach. It also has the ability where, when it enters the battlefield, you exile any number of non-land permanents you both own and control, and then return those cards to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. This card was banned on October 10th, 2022, making it the most recently banned card in the entire format. So, why was Yorion banned? This card was extremely powerful. It was played in one of the best decks in the format, specifically 4-color on-math decks. However, the reasons Wizards citing for the card being banned go simply beyond too strong for the format. In particular, Wizards cite the fact that the card requires you playing an extra 20 cards in your deck, along with a card leading to very repetitive gameplay, being the reason the card was banned. According to Wizards, because you have to run 80 cards to play Yorion as your companion, this means your deck will physically be larger and therefore more difficult to shuffle. Combining this with all of the fetch lands in Modern, and this can add substantially onto the amount of time and effort it takes to play Yorion decks. Now this, strictly speaking, is true. However, most of the community agrees that this is a pretty weird reason to ban a card, and Wizards has never banned a card for this reason before. However, this isn't the only reason why Wizards banned Yorion. The other issue that's cited is the fact that Yorion decks are often very repetitive and take very long turns. Yorion is usually played with cards with enter the battlefield triggers, such as Onmath or Icefang Coatl. This means that resolving Yorion will usually involve resolving a bunch of other triggers, which takes a lot of time. Combine this with the fact that Yorion is always an available option to the Yorion player, and you get very long repetitive games where the non-Yorion player ends up sitting and doing nothing for quite a long time. Combine that with the card's general power level, and Wizards decided to ban the card. Now, could Yorion be unbanned? This is a soft no. While the reasons Wizards gave are a bit strange, they are technically true. Combine that with the fact that the community, at large, is very happy to see Yorion go, and unbanning Yorion is something that no one really wants. It's not that the card strictly needs to be banned, more that everybody seems to prefer the format without Yorion. How could Yorion be fixed to be unbanned? The only real solution here is to remove the companion ability. Next up, we have Cloudpost. This is a locust land with the abilities where it enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it to add 1 colorless for each locust on the battlefield. This card was banned all the way back in September 2011, right after the format was conceived. Why was Cloudpost banned? Well, Cloudpost is basically the better Urza Tron, which is why it's what most people play instead of Tron in Legacy. So, what is Urza Tron and why is a better Urza Tron too good? Urza Tron is a deck built around the 3 Urza lands, Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine, and Urza's Power Plant. These lands have the ability where, if you control at least one of each of them, they can tap to add 2 colorless or 3 colorless. What people will do is play land tutors like Expedition Map and Sylvan's Grind to search up the missing pieces of Tron to try to get all 3 pieces in play as soon as possible, and then play massive colorless threats like Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger and Ugin the Spirit Dragon. These cards are pretty hard to beat, so there are 2 ways you can try to beat Urza Tron decks. You either have to kill them before your opponent can put the combo together, or you have to stop them from assembling all 3 Tron lands. Aggro decks like Burn just do their plan, but faster against Tron, but mid-range and control decks have to play a lot of cards like Ghost Quarter and Fulminator Mage to destroy the Tron player's lands. The reason Cloudpost is better than Tron and why it was banned is because it's more consistent and can use its mana on early turns on other cards. You see, there are 2 Locust lands, Cloudpost and Glimmerpost. which grants you a life for each locus when it enters the battlefield. To get more locus, decks in Legacy use cards like Vesuva, which enters as a copy of any other land on the battlefield. This gives them the same number of key lands to find, but they don't need one of each. They just need a Cloudpost and more locus to start making tons of mana. This leads to two major differences. This means you can't simply blow up one of their lands to shut down all of the locuses, which a lot of decks relied on being able to do to slow down Tron decks. It also means they can afford to spend mana on things other than land tuners early on in the game, and they don't need as many consistency boosters to help find their key cards. In Legacy, this lets them play busted stacks cards like Chalice of the Void to slow down their opponent. It's hard to say exactly what the best build of the deck would be in Modern, but it's pretty plain to see that it would be a lot better than Tron is right now. Cloudpost was banned all the way back in 2011 because this kind of deck would have been way too strong for the metagame all the way back then. Could Cloudpost be unbanned? This is kind of a toss-up, but I'm going to go with a soft no. Tron isn't exactly problematic right now, so a better version of the deck existing wouldn't ruin the format. However, it would push the format more towards a combo off or die metagame. You see, due to being more difficult to interact with than Tron, and Modern lacking key land interactions like Wasteland, slower decks in Modern would basically have no way to win against these decks. They'd have to just hope they have an answer for every single threat the deck plays, as they wouldn't really be able to stop them from getting the mana they want, which is usually the strategy the decks employ against Tron. Modern is already a very fast metagame, where combo and aggro decks thrive, but control and slower mid-range decks do exist, and pushing them out of the metagame the way Cloudpost likely would be bad for the format. Not to mention, since it's better than Tron, you're basically forcing all the Tron players to build new decks without really adding anything to the format, which players generally don't like doing. In this kind of situation, Wizards usually chooses to do nothing, as taking action won't make things better but can make them worse. How could Cloudpost be fixed to be unbanned? There's no way to put the card in a spot where it's playable but not busted. Tron is already on a tight leash, as if the lands were much stronger, they'd be too good for the format. Cloudpost really needs to be either more consistent or add less mana. Making them add a mana for each other would nerf the deck too much, but it's the cleanest solution to the issue. Next up, we have Green Sun Zenith. This is a sorcery with the mana cost of X, meaning any amount of mana and 1 green. It has the effect to search your library for a green creature with mana value of X or less and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle Green Sun Zenith into your library. This card was banned in September of 2011. Why was Green Sun Zenith banned? The issue was that this card was just too good at too many points in the game and would have been such a staple that literally every green deck would play it. You see, Green Sun has a ton of great targets in basically every green deck. It can find good, efficient threats like Tarmogoyf, Scavenging Ooze, and Icefang Coatl. It can find specific hate cards like Hogaak Teague and Collector Oof in certain matchups. And it did all of this while not being that much less efficient than simply casting the spell from your hand, only costing 1 more green mana. This makes it far better for green decks than other similar tutors like Elidamar's Call or Court of Calling. However, the thing that makes this card unique when compared to these other creature tutors, and what makes it far more ubiquitous than these other similar tutors, the way the card interacts with Dryad Arbor. Arbor is a 1/1 forest Dryad creature land. This means that you can play it from your hand like a land, and it can be tapped to add 1 green mana, but it's also a 1/1 creature. It's basically a La Noire Elves that you can play as a land for a turn. However, it is also technically a green creature with a mana value of 0. This means that you can cast Zenith for 1 green mana, with X equaling 0 to tutor it out on turn 1. Which means that Zenith can basically just be a mana dork on turn 1, but be a tutor later on in the game. This is very unique amongst tutors. It makes Green Suns one of the best tutors all on its own. The combination of all of these things makes the card just too good for green decks, and Wizards banned the card to diversify green decks in Modern. Can Green Sun Zenith be unbanned? This is a soft yes. It's very dependent on what you value in a format. The thing is, it would do what Wizards said it would, homogenize green decks. All green decks would almost certainly play the card, as the consistency provided is just too good. Now, whether a lot of decks playing a card would warrant a ban depends a lot on what the card is and how important it is for those decks. Right now in Modern, Lightning Bolt is one of the most played cards in the format, sitting at 41% usage in the metagame. Now, no one would argue that this means Bolt should be banned, because Bolt is just a staple that any red deck can use, not a main part of your strategy. However, Hogaak reaching 40% of the metagame would be a lot more concerning to people, as it would mean 40% of decks were graveyard decks. Players and Wizards has a higher tolerance for cards seeing tons of play if they're supporting cards that aren't the main cards of the strategy, only banning them if they push the metagame towards those decks too much, and Green Suns really wouldn't make green decks too good, it would just make them better. Now, the question is how much you think Green Suns being a card that's played in every green deck is a problem. Do you think it's a card like Bolt that's just a supporting piece, or is it a centerpiece of a deck strategy like Hogaak? Wizards does seem to think it's too format warping, and it would undoubtedly be a staple for unban, but it could have some positive impacts in the format as well. And finally, we have Simian Spirit Guide. This is a 2/2 Ape Spirit with a mana cost of 2 and 1 red with the ability where you can exile it from your hand to add 1 red mana. This card was banned in February of 2021. Why was Simian Spirit Guide banned? Spirit Guide was used in a variety of different combo decks while it was in the format. The ability to power out combos that turn faster to make mana by simply drawing enough cards enables a lot of different combos that wouldn't be viable otherwise. The combo that got this card banned was T-Balt's Trickery combo, which is another banned card we've talked about previously and won't go back into. It was also one of the best cards in Goblin Charbelcher decks, which are decks that would run no lands so that Charbelcher's ability would always deal lethal damage to your opponent. Cards like Spirit Guide that aren't lands that add mana are essential for the deck, and Spirit Guide was one of the best. However, it's not just these specific decks that got Simian Spirit Guide banned. It was the fact that the card existing allowed tons of problematic combo decks to work. For example, there were several decks that were built around drawing their entire deck and then using Spirit Guide to make mana. One of these decks was the Ad Nauseam combo. This is a 5 mana instant that lets you reveal the top card of your deck and put it into your hand, then lose life equal to its mana value. And you can repeat this process any number of times. What the deck would do is cast Angel's Grace, a 1 mana instant that makes it so that you can't lose the game this turn, and then use Ad Nauseam to draw their whole deck. Since they can't lose the game this turn, the fact that this card would make them go below 0 life doesn't matter. Then they would exile Spirit Guides from their hand to make the mana for a spell like Lightning Storm, a very weird instant that deals X damage to any target, where X is 3 plus a number of charge counters on it. And while it's on the stack, any player can discard a land to put 2 charge counters on it and change its target. With your whole deck in your hand, you'd have enough lands to deal at least 20 damage and have more lands in your hand to make sure it ends up hitting your opponent. This is only one of many payoffs you could use with the deck. The reason that Simian Spirit Guide was a problem was that it was a card that made you mana for 0 mana, allowing these kinds of combos to exist. Without cards like Spirit Guide, all of these kinds of combo decks are made much worse, and drawing your whole deck isn't a guaranteed way to win. It turns out there are few ways to draw your entire library. Cards like Ad Nauseam and Grizzlebrand can draw your entire library pretty easily, and ways to get them out faster and more consistently will eventually get printed. Having a card like Simian Spirit Guide in the format will make these decks problematic eventually, even if it isn't a problem right now. Could Simian Spirit Guide be unbanned? This is a no. As I said, the existence of this card makes certain strategies not only better, but possible all on its own. Specifically, more all-in, extremely fast combo decks that win in one turn. Having any of these so-called fast mana cards that cost no mana but produce mana, in the format allows these decks to exist, or will allow them to exist in the future. The issue is that Magic as a game, or at least formats of Magic where 0 mana interactions like Force of Will aren't expected to be most decks, isn't capable of supporting these strategies. So Spirit Guide needs to remain banned more as a safety valve than because any deck it was played in was too good. How could Simian Spirit Guide be fixed to be unbanned? The easiest fix is just giving the card any mana cost on its ability. Making it cost 1 red to activate and having it give you 2 red would make it do the same thing in terms of mana production, but wouldn't allow you to go from having 0 untapped lands to having mana, which is what is ultimately the problem with the card. Alright, and that's the video, and with that, the entire modern ban list. Next up, we'll go over the Legacy ban list and explain why cards are banned in that format as well. If you have any ideas for future videos just like this one, feel free to leave them in a comment down below.